Hello, everybody, and welcome to Vira's webinar titled How to Accelerate Board Level Buy-in to Sustainability Strategy. For anybody who hasn't been to a Vira webinar before, you're at the first of the webinar series for 2024, and the focus of our webinars is helping people working in sustainability and ESG focused roles on their most pressing challenges. And the challenge today comes from the perspective of people working in businesses that have big sustainability goals and big challenges. The challenge lies in accelerating the speed to which you launch, approve, and fund initiatives or projects in the companies that you work in. So whether it's an ESG checklist, a ESG policy, a biodiversity initiative, or anything in the spectrum of sustainability in the company, well, then this webinar is about helping to speed up that process. And it's more than just the process or the conversation with board level members or executive leadership on how to advance sustainability. It's about the actual day-to-day operation of sustainability as well. So in this webinar today, I'm joined by a very special guest, somebody who is a practitioner at the top of their game, working for a sustainable infrastructure asset manager called NTR PLC. Áine Higgins is a special guest, and over the last year, I've had the pleasure of working closely with Áine on delivering biodiversity training to the team at NTR. Throughout our time working together, I've learned a lot about what sustainability looks like in the industry that Áine is in. I understand what the risks are. And even in the build up to this webinar, I learned a lot in the research that we did on how boards are structured, what the board personalities care about, and most importantly, what are the things that are the most material for NTR as a business. I want to explore Áine's approach to this topic today, and there's three core areas that we're going to look at. So the first one is knowing your board or understanding your board and the personalities that are in it. The second is knowledge and identifying risks and opportunities in the business that you're in. And then the third is around the delivery of this actual sustainability strategy. So we're going all the way from the high level concept, the blue sky thinking, into the actual delivery of some of the ideas that we're talking about presenting to boards. And yeah, before I end up giving away everything, I want to take this chance to introduce Áine and NTR and start by asking Áine, how are you first? And secondly, can you give us a bit of a background on NTR PLC?
Hi there, how are you all? And thanks for having me, Jack. How I am? A little bit stressed actually at the minute. I've just discovered before we joined here that my camera didn't work, so there was a fast rewiring. So apologies for the quality of that, but I guess you get to see something anyway, even if it's not too clear. But yeah, so yes, we've worked with Vira over the last year or so. So delighted to support on this webinar, and indeed there are plenty of other topics as well that Vira cover. So be sure and have a look at the past ones and join into the future ones. Before I start talking about the board, and I suppose maybe my approach and some learnings along the way, is a little bit about NTR, because possibly it's a company you may not have heard about. We're a specialist asset manager that's working really to drive energy transition, so the clean energy transition in Europe. So we acquire, we develop, we build, and we operate renewable energy assets. So that means we have wind farms, onshore wind farms, solar, battery, and we're spread across Europe. We're in Ireland, England, Spain, France, Italy, Finland, Sweden. And what's really important to us is maximizing the output of those wind farms and those assets rather. And as well as that, caring for the environment, the people, the communities. So the whole mix of what goes into sustainability. Topics such as carbon footprint, biodiversity, our impact on our neighbours, really important topics for us. We voluntarily report our ESG performance and activities each year, and we put it on our website. We report data at a company level, at a fund level, and down to asset level. And also then within our annual report, we talk about what we've done during the year to try bring the topic alive. So maybe we've had case studies on technology improvements. Maybe it was a biodiversity initiative. Maybe it was something our staff got involved in. But we kind of share these stories just to show how we've tried to live it in a meaningful way, not just the data points during the year. I suppose that in terms of the regulation that governs us, we're a financial product. So SFD, or Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, is the important one for us. CRSD obviously is there for a lot of companies, not particularly us. We're under the radar of it, the de minimis at the moment. But we're very mindful of what's happening in that space, because obviously it'll influence the whole reporting expectations out there. And in terms of kind of where we are, we're based here in Dublin, in Ireland. We're about 50 people. We've about 1.5 billion assets under management, and we did something like 1.2 million megawatt hours of clean energy last year, which displaced about 200,000 tons of CO2 in the year. So that's kind of the game that we're in.
Yeah, that's great. And thanks for giving an overview. I definitely learned something, even though I already know a lot of this information. The context of understanding what you report under, what matters, but also the reference to the CSRD, which will be relevant for a lot of people. Before we get into the depth of the topic, I just want to say to everybody who's here that Áine's notes and any questions you may have for Áine will be going out in a follow-up newsletter after the webinar. So if you are working in the asset industry, asset management, or any type of alternative investment industry, or you're just interested in learning a bit more about the pure sustainability side of what Áine does, throughout this webinar, if you put in questions into the chat, we'll then be able to pass that back to Áine after, and she'll be able to answer them in a robust way. So my colleague Owen is going to put a link into our newsletter or mailing list. So that'll be in the chat now. If you click on that and submit your email, and then throughout the webinar, like I say, if anything pops into your head, put it into the chat, and then we'll be able to send that to Áine after. And you'll also receive some of the additional things, tools, or any resources that Áine might suggest could be helpful along your sustainability journey. So with that being said, the first topic we're going to dive into is around knowing your board, and looking at two succinct topics beneath this is board structures and personalities. So my first question under board structures, Áine, is give us an idea of what the board at NTR PLC looks like. How many people are on it? What sort of committees are involved? And yeah, just give us an idea of how it functions.
Okay. So I suppose like any organization, we have a few layers of management and governance. And I suppose if you start within the company, first of all, you'll have the executive leadership team. So that's the CEO, CFO, for us, Chief Investment Officer, and others. And they in turn, they are concerned with the day-to-day management and operation and decision-making of the business. And of course, over them is the board of directors. And the board of directors are the people who are the legal directors. And I know people have director in titles, but there's a difference with a legal director, and they carry certain responsibilities. On the board in general, its purpose is to manage the performance and the conformance of a company. So the performance, the strategic direction it steers the ship. Are we doing the right things? Are we going the right direction? Are we thinking far enough down the line? Can we meet all our requirements? And the conformance then is, are we doing things right? So are we, have we the right control systems, risk management, so on and so forth in place? And that is the perspective of the board, performance and conformance. In our board, we have a board of 9. which is comprised of 3 executive members. So they're the full-time NTR employees, CEO, CFO, CIO. And we have 6 non-executive directors. And within that 6, 3 are independent and 3 represent a family shareholder. So there's a strong family shareholder in NTR, and that family is represented on the board then through these 3 directors, including our chairperson. So that brings a flavour to our board that might be different to other boards, brings a very sense of long-term thinking, as opposed to kind of quarterly results and so on and so forth. So it's an interesting mix. My previous role, as Jack said, was with Siemens, so it was much more about the quarterly results. In NTR, that there's quite a long-term focus, which suits the business as well, because asset management in wind farms and operations like that is a long-term game. So meetings are held across the board about quarterly and can usually go on for the best part of the day. Within the board then, that are beneath the board, shall we say, there are subcommittees, and subcommittees are just a simple way of dividing up work, essentially. So the subcommittee can get into a topic in a more detailed way and bring the results and the recommendations and the output back to the board. So in our case, we have an audit subcommittee, a remuneration, and a nomination subcommittee. We don't actually have a sustainability subcommittee, and a lot of companies do. And there is no right or wrong with that. I think every board needs to determine for itself what suits the business, what suits the topics that they have to address, the challenges, so on and so forth. What I would say, though, is if you're wondering about any of those subcommittees or you have to present to them, remember that they all have a terms of reference document. So that terms of reference declares and defines and describes what they're about, what their purpose is, who's on it, what they look at, how they decide, so on and so forth. So, if you're in front of the audit committee and you're wondering, what are these guys about? Start with the terms of reference for that group of people. And it gives you a good insight into what's going on there. Typically, the boards are chaired by somebody who's on the main board. So the chair of our audit subcommittee is one of the independent directors. And that person brings the message of the audit committee back to the board and gives them an update and whatever recommendations are needed. I would say, though, from a sustainability practitioner point of view, just remember that some of these subcommittees have different perspectives. So it is most likely a sustainability subcommittee is focused on the strategy side of things. What should we be doing? How do we get there? Have we the resources? How do we plan it out? What are our milestones? What's our performance like? So they're quite future focused. Yes, there's data along the way and all the rest of it, but the essence of what they're there to do is to drive the topic. And that's very much in keeping with the performance side of the board activities. On the other hand, the audit committee is there to check that the right things are being done. So it's the conformance side. So if your sustainability topic is before the audit committee, it's really interested in verifying the data, in verifying any claims that you're making, sustainability progress are credible, so on and so forth. So slightly different perspectives. And if you're presenting to any of those committees, probably worth bearing in mind the different perspectives that they're looking at the information. Because I suppose your requirement is to meet their need. And your presentation or your pitch, as it were, has to meet the perspective that they're interested in, either the performance or the conformance side. I know that in some companies, as a result of CSRD, the sequencing of the workload through the committees needs to be just kind of carefully managed, because now under CSRD, the audit committee needs to see the results and the data before you publish anything. So just remember the practicalities of getting your work through the various committees. You probably will have to go to the sustainability committee first to sign off on the data, any content for an annual report. It then goes to the audit committee. The auditors will have a look at it, they'll sign it off, and then it goes to the PLC board or your primary board. So, your timing might have changed as a result of COSD because the committees don't all have the same frequency. Our board meets quarterly, our audit committee meets 3 times a year. So, and sustainability committee may have a different frequency. So, just as a practitioner, just watch that sequencing to make sure that you don't, that you allow yourself a sufficient time to get your data through the board.
Yeah, I think that's a really good overview of the nuts and bolts, and it's a great bit of context to give for people who are coming in who either understand this process or will start to work on building out a committee, or indeed progressing into becoming somebody that's involved in these big decision meetings. So we understand the structure of the board. There's a couple of different committees, and the programming of how you approach these committees is vital. One is, like you say, for conformance in that audit side. Then on the other side, it's on that strategy side of various initiatives. But you've got to make sure you've got your eggs lined up, or ducks lined up, should I say, not eggs, when it comes to the audit committee. Um, okay, so we understand the structure. Let's get into some of that higher level, exciting stuff now. So one challenge I see in the world of sustainability communications in businesses and externally is this difficulty in finding the right tonality or cadence when it comes to how we communicate things. Sometimes things are a bit too onerous on the data side, or just on the matter of fact side of the difficulty and the challenges of climate change and sustainability in business. And then on the other side, we have maybe some of the overly aspirational or sweetened kind of perspectives on things, or overly optimistic, you could say, in a sense. What is the approach that you take into mind when you talk about blue sky thinking? What does that mean for sustainability, and what does it mean in how you approach the board?
Yeah, I suppose you have to remember, the board is a construct of different people, and they're coming from different backgrounds. No more than any other grouping, they'll have different styles and different preferences. And it's really helpful to try get to know what some of those are. You might have people who like just the visuals, the big picture, the aspiration, the long-term targets, the roadmaps, top line results, key initiatives, kind of that high level stuff. And you might equally have people who love the detailed project plans and milestone or cost benefit analysis, and the granular substance that goes behind any proposal. And if you're like me, your board would probably be a mix of both. So I suppose my approach on that is generally, as part of my input to a board pack, there'll be kind of two angles to it. One is what we will be talking about in the meeting in terms of presentation. So the overview slides. What is our plan? What's my ask? Why am I here? What do I need to talk to you about? What's our progress? What do I need from the board? Type of stuff. However, catering to those who like the detail, I will also add an appendix in. And in that appendix will be all those details. So as I say, the cost benefit analysis, the pros and cons of different approaches, the project plan itself, the milestones, whatever is appropriate to the topic. And that allows you to cater to the big picture people and the detailed people, because the board pack goes out prior to the meeting. So those that like the detail will have got into it before the meeting. And obviously you may get questions on it, that's fair game. But mostly your conversation will probably be around the bigger picture stuff, because you'll have satisfied the detail requirement of those other folks by providing the substance behind the proposal in your appendices. So it's quite likely then that it allows everybody to stay on the same page of whatever the ask is in certain cases along the board. And I suppose it's also to remember that you do always have to stand in front of those people, knowing the question, why are you there? What is your ask? Why is this important? what do you need to explain, why now, why the urgency, whatever that is, you have to bring them with you. And that's applicable for whether they're blue sky or detail. And that really sets the scene for the rest of the conversation.
Brilliant. And could you give me an example from your experience in NTR of a couple of those big projects that you approached the board with, and contextualize it a bit for people so they can start to understand in their own context as well?
Yeah, I suppose a more recent one, I mentioned the SFDR regulation earlier. So as a business, we had a strategy that we wanted our next fund to be what's called a dark green fund. That means that it meets the Article 9 requirements of SFDR. And to ensure that we met that, there was a whole program in place, a gap analysis, improvement projects, so on and so forth, and certain processes needed to be enhanced. So for instance, our ESG screening of potential acquisitions needed an upgrade. Our approach to responsible sourcing needed to be enhanced. Our management of sustainability risk in its entirety needed a look at and needed to be beefed up. And all of those topics then fed into what is in our organization, a document called our ESG policy. And our ESG policy is on our website as well. It's not a single page, like some policies. It's actually probably more a management system description document that describes how we do certain things at certain stages of our business. So it's 30 pages long or something like that. And as a result of all the enhancements we were making within the business to meet the SFDR requirements, our ESG policy was also upgraded. That policy is owned by the board and approved by the board. So obviously with changes to the policy, it needed to go back to the board for that approval. And indeed, they approve it on an annual basis. So in terms of the presentation that walked them through that to get their approval, the presentation firstly was, why are we here? We want to launch a dark green fund. It'll be good for our business. We needed to meet SFDR or requirements. The what did we have to change? We changed our ESG screening, we changed our responsible sourcing, we changed our mechanism for managing sustainability risk. And what do I need from the board? I need you to approve this new policy. So the presentation walked through the why, the what has changed, and what do I need. In addition to that, with those kind of summary slides with the overview on it, the policy itself was also circulated. So the detail of the document. And again, this is the balance between kind of the big picture overview and the simple messaging of what do you want from the board and why you're there, along with the detail of the actual document itself. So the policy and the presentation went out a week beforehand, and then during the board, the discussion was on the changes, any questions that the directors had, and subsequently the approval of that policy.
Yeah, that's great. And I always get a sense from you that you do a lot of groundwork in preparing your pipeline of projects or initiatives in advance, and that kind of communication up front means that there's usually no surprises for the people that you're presenting to. And in my experience and across a lot of the businesses we've worked with, we've heard about people being in situations where they just struggle to get buy-in from certain members of the board, or we'll put a bit of a delay on this particular project because it's just a bit awkward trying to get things over the line, and I've got a strategy to focus on, or I've got a policy to write up, or I've got a SBTI to prepare to make a submission for. And I guess at the crux of this entire webinar is this idea that it doesn't necessarily need to be that way. So to round off this section on blue sky thinking and the examples you've given, what would you say are 3 practical tips for doing this? If there wasn't already 3 hidden in there, if you could summarize or just give whatever you're thinking here.
I think the main thing, first of all, is, you have to be very clear in your communications. I would say stay away from technical language. unless your board are very familiar with it, because otherwise you're inclined to lose people, or they glaze over, or they tune out a little bit. So, straightforward language, and make it clear for them to understand exactly what's going on. Always remember the why, though. Why now? Why this? What's the impact of it going to be? And if you can't explain that for yourself, you probably need to kind of stand back and have a think about it, because that is really the nub of any communications to a board as well. I would say as well, though, when you have the opportunity to be in front of the board, as well as being there, we'll say, to get that decision, like I was with the ESG policy or so, remember always to give them a little bit of progress update. It may not be something that you'd consider you talk at the meeting if time gets tight on the agenda. But it's always good for them to know that there's momentum happening in some of the other initiatives as well. So maybe you have a reporting schedule, maybe you have other improvement projects going on, so on and so forth. So, simple dashboards, percentage completion, pie charts, the RAG system, red, orange, green traffic lights. Maybe you need to highlight if there was a roadblock. Maybe you need to give them reassurance things are on time. It's always good to kind of give that a single page overview of the program as well. And like you mentioned there, Jack, if you know of something that's coming down the track that's likely to impact at a future date, maybe it's not here yet, but it's no harm to put it in as a kind of for information type slide. So, new piece of legislation coming down will be relevant to us in 2026, likely that we will have to examine our supply chain, our manufacturing, our marketing approach, whatever it is. So you're kind of signposting something that they will see more of at a later stage. But at least you've introduced some of the words, the terminology, maybe the name of it, things like that. So, use your chance there to firstly get what you need in terms of the decision, the approval, whatever, a little bit of status update. And if there's any signposting that you need to do of future things that are coming down the track that you just want to kind of familiarize the terminology even with the board, and use that as well. Those latter two ones you may not talk about during the meeting, or indeed you might if there's time. But it's always good for them to be in packs as well.
Yeah, I think there's an element of this around visualization, and by having the backup material, the charts, the pipeline, if you want to call it that, the deck, or the presentation of the different things you plan on working on throughout the year is a real way to get buy into your own vision into what you're trying to achieve. Because I think you can have all of them listed or have all those ideas, but I think if it can't be visualized, so to speak, it's hard for people to buy into it, or else it's just words. So that's great. So we're moving into the second topic here, which is around knowledge, risks, and opportunities. So for anybody in the audience, I'm sure they're familiar with the language of risks and opportunities if they're working at this level. And if you're not, you'll learn something new from Áine in this section. And we've broken it down into two pieces. So how do we assess the knowledge of a board? And how do we assess the key risks and opportunities in terms of how we approach the board as well? So on the first subtopic there on assessing knowledge, when you joined NTR, you talked about how one of the first things you did was assessing the knowledge level of the company across a variety of different areas. How would you recommend somebody go about that process, whether they're starting somewhere or it's something that they're intending on doing in the company they work in right now?
Yeah, NTR is a small company, so I suppose I had an advantage in being able to kind of easily move around it and get to people. But when I started with NTR, my immediate go-to was setting up tons of one-to-ones with people. So, it does a number of things. It gives you a fast read into what's going on in the organization. It gets you introduced to somebody else that you might be working with. And really the objective of those is actually probably more listening rather than talking from your perspective if you're new, but it's kind of what's going on in their life, in their work life. What is the role about? What are their challenges? What's working well for them? How does sustainability fit with them? And I would say you're probably listening carefully to phrases, to feedback, to words. You'll get a feel for your apostles, those who are really supportive. You'll get a feel for the neutrals, who are kind of neither here nor there, and you'll get a feel for those who are skeptical about it. And it's important to know all those things. You'll get a feel for how much a person knows about it in terms of how it applies to their job as well. So I would certainly, when I started in NTR, that's what I did. I mean, I know you can go and you could do things like knowledge surveys and something a bit more formal, and possibly in a larger organization, maybe that's where you need to go. Or you could do workshops with different teams and pose certain questions to them. But really in those early days, in terms of trying to establish what's going on in the business, what's important in the business, how do people do their job, how does sustainability fit with their work? You are very much asking lots of questions and being very curious about things, and definitely in listening mode. Because you'll hear along the way things that might become potential roadblocks, but you'll also hear of opportunities, and into how sustainability could help somebody in their job or help them with a competitor, and so on and so forth. When it comes to knowledge base of board members, though, that's a little bit more difficult because they're one step removed from the organization, and these people are not full-time in your organization. And so your chance to sit with them informally is a little bit tougher. But what I would say instead is, sit with one of your executive team who are on the board and ask them to give you some briefing around the personalities around that table. What are the backgrounds of the people? You might have legal, you might have accountancy, you might have the sustainability, you might have all different types of walk of life. What other boards are those non-executive directors sitting on? What has been their experience to date? For instance, the person who chaired our audit subcommittee was also on, at one stage, a sustainability subcommittee of a different company. There was a huge support in the topic. And it was wonderful to know that because she had both the conformance and the performance perspective. So from that point of view, it's good to kind of just do your research. And what you're trying to do at the end of it, and putting a more formal name on it, is your stakeholder mapping. So you're trying to find out who has influence over what topic, who's likely to be supportive, who has concerns, who's very knowledgeable, who needs more information, so on and so forth. And if you can understand this landscape, then you can design around the challenges and the opportunities of that landscape. But ultimately, what you are doing is stakeholder mapping.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that, I guess that was the precursor to when we actually started working together. There was that kind of understanding or assessment of what was going on in the business, which is, and I will say before we move into the risks and opportunities piece, one thing that we have done at Vira is we've prepared a board level template. So really how to action some of the things that Áine has said. How do you assess knowledge levels and the strategy to go about getting to a position like the position Áine's in at this point? And Owen is going to share a link into the chat for anybody who wants access to that or wants a bit of guidance on that. We can provide that. So if you just follow the link that Owen sends in, and we can provide you something actionable to kick on from what Áine just talked about. So next piece here is around risks and opportunities and extending beyond the general knowledge level to the big picture stuff that concerns longevity and ultimately the sustainability of the business. Firstly, what are the risks and opportunities, and how do you communicate the importance of those risks and opportunities in the boardroom if they're not already very clearly known?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I would always say there's kind of like a few ways of raising the sustainability topic within the boardroom. And we've kind of talked about, I suppose, the purest way in the sense of the sustainability being the agenda item. But there's also generally in every company a risks and opportunities process on the go as well. And every single director will want to know what risks the business is facing. I've never yet come across a director that is not interested in risks because ultimately that's their legal obligation in terms of managing the company and minding the company's future. It's a topic that really fits with the audit subcommittee. And in each risk, people will want to know is what's the risk profile? So how likely is it to happen and what could the impact be? And secondly, then how is it mitigated? And what the message the directors will want to know is here are our top risks, and yes, they are being controlled. They'll want to know about movement and risks. Has something become up the scale since we last talked our last quarterly meeting? Has something dampened down, as it were, because we have new controls or the external environment has changed, so on and so forth. So, I would say for every sustainability person, given sustainability risks and have financial impact, reputational impact, market impacts, your sustainability risks need to be articulated in there. So the types of things, what's the risk of not meeting legislation? So CRSD will say, is there a risk of losing key customers because you can't give them your carbon footprint data? Is there a product risk because your development of the product isn't keeping up with the levels of recycling of the future end life of that product, so on and so forth. For us, is there a risk of losing investors because we can't hold our Article 9 status? Things like that. We have a lot of health and safety risks in our work because of construction and operation of wind farms and solar and battery sites. We have a lot of environmental risks because obviously we're all in rural areas. We have community relation risks because we want to be a good neighbor, and so on and so forth. So another in to your board, if I could use that kind of an approach, is through the risk register. And also equally, perhaps there are opportunities as well. So is there an opportunity to compete better because your product now has a new sustainability edge to it? I noticed yesterday one of the large wind farm producers, wind turbine producers announced yesterday that their blades are now 95% recyclable. That's a big deal in the wind industry. So from that point of view, does that give them a competitive edge? And that has been born through their sustainability strategy and their long-term goals, because there was much research and development went into that, I imagine. So, use that mechanism as well to complement the other side of it, which is bringing the sustainability topics kind of mainstream to the board.
Yeah, I love it. And I think the unintentional pun of the blades giving people a competitive edge was got a little giggle out of me in the background. So yeah, really good examples. And yeah, like you said, the language of risk will make people listen, and it's important to understand that depending on who you're talking to. So yeah, we've covered the two core topics at the start, and just to recap for people, we've looked at understanding and knowing your board. We've looked at assessing knowledge levels, and as I said, we've provided some value for people through the chat on that topic. And then finally, risks and opportunities. So this is all talking on the high level. We've got a lot of value out of the questions that have been asked so far. And now we want to understand a bit more about the delivery of this, the day to day. How is this operationalized in a sense? So on this topic of delivering, can you walk me through the important stages of how you would deliver on the strategy? Let's use the example of the ESG policy, the big project you spoke about earlier in the webinar.
Yeah, So the updates of the policy were born out of updates in processes within the organization. So kind of one of the key processes that did change was our ESG screening process for acquisitions. So when in our business, probably one of the most important decisions is whether to buy an asset or not. And it could be in construction, it could be operation, or it could be a development site. Because that's the time you really get to kick all the tires and test everything and find out everything that you need to know about the thing before it becomes yours and now your responsibility. So our ESG screening is incredibly important. And of course, in parallel to our ESG screening, we also said we wanted to be Article 9. There are requirements that go with Article 9 in terms of do no harm, EU taxonomy alignment, and kind of technical stuff like that. So when we looked at our ESG screening checklist as it was at that stage, it was a list of about 16 questions or so. And we knew that that needed to be beefed up in quite a meaningful way. Now, the easier approach and maybe the faster approach would have been me to sit at my desk for a few days and knock it out. However, the likelihood of getting buy-in and understanding would be quite low. So alternatively, I suppose the approach that I generally take is to bring people with you. I'm always very cautious of designing anything on your own. It rarely fits like you think it will. So, you know, by having somebody, a key person, a key influencer within the investment team, being part of the team, and also one of our new investment partner, we were partnering on this fund with a new partner, and they would also have a decision-making role in the acquisition journey as well. So it was important to have them on board. So with those two other parties, we sat down and we looked at this ESG checklist, and you know, the brainstorm initially brought it as far as I think I remember 127 questions. You know, for any of you working in a business, if you put a checklist of 127 questions in front of anybody, you know it's going to be thrown back at you, or at the very least, maybe populated in a not an in-depth way. So it has to be manageable. And I think the working group then, our task was to bring that back to something, focusing on the core topics, focusing on it being manageable and understandable, and forgetting the technical language, putting it in language of somebody from the investment team or the asset management team would understand. So you don't need to be a sustainability expert to understand this. And we pared it back and went through initiative cycling, and we ended up with about 37 questions. And then, okay, so now we have a great checklist, that's wonderful, but now you have to define the process and how to use it. And what does a good answer look like? And what does a weak answer look like? And what will put up red flags or what will we be very comfortable with? So you kind of have to bring it right to the nth degree in terms of usability, kind of like road testing it effectively. And of course, next thing is, you know, that is a small working group, and it has brought it from its initial state right to its current point. You now have to bring in lots of other people. So for that, we took all the members of the investment team and the asset management team, because there were technical questions in there to do with technology as well, and brought them off site and walked through every single question and the why. Why is that question there? What is the risk we're trying to manage? What is the information we're trying to gather? And where do you go to get that information? So really the hand holding of the team and bringing everybody through it in a deep, meaningful way, other than just issuing it and say, go use. And then finally, as well as after the training, we as a buddy group, we also partnered with the very next acquisition, the leader of the very next acquisition, to actually see the checklist being used in real time. And out of that, there were some learnings, and there was a version 2 amended as well, because there was continuous improvement, and continuous improvement is so healthy for your organization. So use every opportunity to learn and improve it for the users, and still getting the robust information that you need for the purpose of the question. So from that point of view, that was, I suppose, the detailed process that we went through to upgrade something, to test it, to bring it to life for people, to show what good looks like, and then to actually put it into practice.
Yeah, it's a great answer. And I think For anybody who's listening who's in a different type of business, I can share a quick anecdote about how the process Áine is describing is also very useful in how you go about setting up a supplier checklist as well. In that context, it's important to understand what are the criteria, what are good and bad answers, and being able to set benchmarks because obviously now in this context, we're talking about SFDR when we're talking about NTR, but in the context of the CSRD and how people engage with their suppliers and external stakeholders, it's important to apply that same level of rigor to assessing checklists of all types. So we're now coming towards the end, and I believe in always giving, I call it the cup of tea moment at the end, where we like to give people a moment before the turn of the hour to reflect on the webinar, grab a cup of tea, and relax before they get social burnout from lots of talking. But yeah, the final thing I want to ask you was, what are the actionable tips you'd give the audience today? And we've touched on a couple of the different types of people, whether they're advanced or just begin to make progress. But yeah, I'd like to hear what advice you'd like to give directly to those people who are in those positions.
Yeah, I suppose the first bit is remember you're constantly communicating, whether you're doing it on purpose or it's informal or it's a presentation or it's a chit chat or it's in the lift or on the stairs or whatever, you're constantly communicating, and use all opportunities to talk about the sustainability in the context of the business. And of course, sustainability has to support the business. It has to be aligned with the business, and it has to be a way of making the business more successful. So knit the two together. I remember when I started work, so somebody senior always told me, don't forget about the internal marketing. Now, that's not telling people how wonderful you are the whole time. I'm sure you are, but really kind of sell your topic and talk about your topic, and kind of personality or outlooks that serve well, and that is stay curious and be tenacious. Curiosity always helps you understand kind of the other person's perspective, where they're coming from, and maybe give you an in to position your topic in a slightly different way that makes it more accessible for them or more useful for them. And tenacious is because you just need to keep at it, because it won't always work all the time, and there will be setbacks, and expect them, and learn from them and reflect on what worked and what didn't work and why that happened, and adapt and learn from it. I would also say, kind of find your tribe in the organization. Um, there are always people who are very aligned in your thinking and love the topic of sustainability, and they live in all sorts of organizations and in all sorts of corners. So, find those people as well, because they're really energizing, they're very refreshing, they give you new ideas, they can become part of your team. And if you're kind of growing something from the bottom up, and it's not always about senior management and board and having those guys aligned, you also need grassroots aligned. So from that point of view, find those people and pull them in and work with them, and it's a joy to have them around. If you're in an organization where you're struggling to get the buy-in, to get the hearing, remember that risk register. Nobody likes to have uncontrolled risks in their organization. Nobody. So, consider that as a way of introducing the topic, focusing on it. And I suppose maybe lastly for me, I always like to have kind of some bit of long-term thinking going on, that kind of pulls you forward into a new idea or making progress. So you have to be constantly evolving. Um, and that can be a challenge. It's something that could be a slow burn. It could be something that you're mulling over and you're cooking for a while in your own mind before you share it with others. You have to do a bit of research, you have to get alignment, you share it with others, you build it up. But always have kind of some of those things on the go as well. They're good for the soul in terms of keeping you motivated as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a high level, but there's actionables in there. If you're struggling to find things through a risk lens, And if you're making progress, don't get complacent. Um, Áine, I'd like to say thank you for this time you've given us today and the insight you've given us into the company and your experience. I am going to send out a questionnaire to people in the audience after this, to the attendees, and that way you'll be able to ask particular questions to Áine that she can answer in a follow-up. Áine, there is one kind of general question that came into the chat, which I think would be useful for you to answer. And it's from an anonymous attendee who just asked, how would you recommend a young team member position themselves onto a pathway to be an ESG manager? Because I know you're obviously at that point, so it'd be good if you could give somebody who's aspiring a bit of an insight there.
Okay, and this is probably where the curiosity bit really plays well for people. Put your hand up, volunteer, ask the person who is looking after some topic that's in the ESG space, could I sit in on a meeting? Can I help with anything? I'm good at the data analysis, I'm good at the PowerPoint slides, and whatever else it is, whatever you can bring to it, but raise your voice. Don't wait for people to come and ask you. And it's a, people always, I think there's sometimes a tendency that people will think somebody will notice I'm kind of interested in this, but don't bank on it, because it may not happen depending on how aware people are around you. So, raise your voice, put up your hand, ask, is there anything I can do to help in that area?
Brilliant.
And
Yeah.
I don't know anyone who would turn away help. And you're in.
Yeah, if you don't ask, you don't get as well. If it's something you're passionate about, if you keep knocking on doors, opportunities will come your way.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. I
And
think
then
it's
you're part of the tribe.
yeah, exactly. You get the seal of approval. Um, Oftentimes though, it's they're one person teams, so yeah, having the extra people around would probably also be welcome. And
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, that's it. And thanks again, Áine, and have a wonderful rest of the day. And to anybody who joined us today, thank you so much. Any additional questions that fly in now, we'll be sure that they go into the follow-up newsletter. So remember to click on that link in the chat, and we'll make sure you get lots of good insights from Áine in the follow-up. And yeah, everybody enjoy their day. I'm going to stay on for another second just to make sure we collect any extra questions. But everybody else, you're free to have your cup of tea moment. And thanks very much.
Thanks for having me, Jack. It's been a pleasure, and wish everybody a good day.
Thanks, Áine. Pleasure. Bye now.